The reason why we're here today is because we're looking for volunteers. And we're looking for volunteers to go into classrooms and give a 2-minute pitch on why people should be registered to vote, pass out voter registration forms, and get people registered on the spot. In our experience, a majority of students that are college age and into young adulthood are not registered to vote. And so if we can get people sort of in the moment as a captive audience and have the forms there for them, we actually register a ton of people to vote. So I did this back in 2012 with Kanu, Hawaii. And we did it primarily on the UH Manoa campus. And we registered close to 1,000 students over the course of about a month and a half to 2 months. And this was volunteers just going into classrooms, passing out forms, answering questions, giving a pitch, and then collecting up the forms afterwards. And what was great about it was not only the numbers of people registered, but we went back and we checked with people. We actually compared people that had signed up through that process with the actual voter file after the election, which is, you can get it. It's public information. And 90% of the people that we registered actually turned out to vote, which is incredible because the registration and the turnout rate in that area and for kind of the college age population is more like 35%. And so the outcomes were awesome. But the other thing that was pretty cool about it was the team of volunteers that signed up to do it ended up being kind of a core group of people who had a leadership development experience together, because a lot of what they were doing, having to talk in front of a group, sometimes it was small groups, like only 5-10 people, sometimes it was large groups if they wanted to do that, give the pitch, be persuasive, collect up the forms, and then debrief together around what was working and what was not working, develop some core leadership skills. And then for those that were interested in politics and getting more into politics, that's actually kind of the first thing you have to know how to do if you want to run your own campaign, is how to go out and engage people and get them, make sure they're registered to vote. And especially if you want to do it without depending on a lot of money and big donations to do it, you got to be out there pounding the pavement and getting people engaged in politics. So it was a good experience for those of us who were in that kind of volunteer leadership team too. So there's a couple reasons we're doing this. Many reasons we're doing this, but if I had to describe it sort of from the big picture down to the nuts and bolts, one of the big reasons is that something historic happened last year, and I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but last year was the first year that millennials tied the baby boomers as the largest generational voting bloc in America. So now there are as many baby boomers that are eligible to vote as there are baby boomers. And baby boomers for the last 30 years have sort of dominated politics with their ideas and their interests, understandably because of the largest segment of voting America. But now millennials have tied them. Unfortunately, millennials only turn out in half the numbers that baby boomers do. And that means a couple of things. First, if millennials had turned out in the numbers that boomers do, they would have changed the course of the election. And it doesn't matter who you're for or against, but the results from the local level up to the national level would have been radically different if millennials had turned out to vote. As an example, 6 of the presidential swing states were won by less than 2% of the voting population in those states. And in one of those key states, New Hampshire, the election was decided by less than 2,700 votes. And so the votes count, they matter. Here locally, in every election cycle, there's probably about 10 races locally that are decided by less than 100 votes. And so registering 100 people in an area to actually turn out to vote can decide the election. Whether your issue is student debt, public funding of universities, jobs for young people, the environment, or just the character of the people that represent us in elected office, when you don't show up, your voice counts less. Your issues matter less to those people who are representing us. And probably most importantly, someone else is taking your seat at that table. That means when you don't show up and make your voice heard, someone else's voice is amplified. And too often nowadays, that someone else is someone with money and connections. And so the only way to blunt the influence of money in politics and to make money count less and voices count more is to actually show up and vote. And part of the reason why money matters so much nowadays is that not enough of us are turning out to do that. So that's what this effort is about. That's what this pilot project is about, and that's what this larger civic engagement campaign is about. Getting registered to vote and getting a little bit informed is kind of the first step. turning out and voting is the second step, and then there's plenty to do after that. Be involved with issues, learn about the political system in greater depth, and that's something that both Kanu and Common Cause are available for. So that's sort of the why of this. It's important to say that both for us individually and as organizations, and for KCC as an entity, we have no interest in swaying people's vote. We don't care about the candidates. We don't care who you vote for. What we're in this for is to make sure that people do vote. And that's something, if you decide to volunteer for this, it's something that we all need to take to heart, that if you're asked about your political view or who you're voting for, we're not supposed to share any of that. You know, our response is, what's important to me is you turn out to vote. That's what matters. We kind of went around and shared whether we had registered to vote or not. And what I'm going to do as kind of the core of this training is actually walk through what will happen if you decide to go into a classroom. So you all have in front of you the voter registration form, right? And as a side note, if you were to do this on your own for your company, your school, or your church, and you were to make copies of the registration form yourself, you need to copy both sides of it. Or when it's turned in, it will not be counted as an actual registration. So it's something to bear in mind. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the form and just walk through a couple of the common questions we get on it. Okay, so and if you haven't registered to vote or you're not sure your registration is current, I would encourage you to fill this out as I'm talking through this. So you can start filling it out now. You can decide before the end whether you really want to turn it in to me or not. But I'm going to tell you how we handle the voter registration forms and where it goes afterwards too. But I'd encourage you to start filling it out so that we can troubleshoot here. Like if there's things that don't make sense on the form or questions you have, we can go through them together. But here's a few of the questions that we get or problems that we troubleshoot along the way. First is the forms have to be filled out in pen. So if you don't have a pen, I believe Corey brought a bunch of pens, and we can pass those around. You can only vote in one state. And so if you're from another place, my suggestion is that you register to vote and vote in the community where you want your voice to count for that election cycle. So in other words, if you're living here and you're paying attention to issues here and you want to make a difference in how issues play out in Hawaii, then register to vote and vote here. If your heart is in California and you care about the issues that matter there, then register and vote there. But if you're here and you want to be engaged in this community, then by all means fill the registration form and you can be registered today. If you're not sure whether you're registered or if your registration is current, if you've moved within the last year, there's no harm in re-registering. The Office of Elections will simply update your information based on the form. You'll need your Social Security number. And when we've done this in the past with groups of students, sometimes they don't have their Social Security number. So actually we try to send a notice out ahead of time to bring your Social Security number or know it ahead of time so that you can fill out the form. And I'll get to that in a minute. If you don't know it and that's the one blank, or you have a couple of blanks that you're not sure about, you can always turn the form in later to this room, Iliahi AB. There'll be a drop box here for you to drop the forms into. And I'll verify that with Denise, but she said this is going to be sort of the headquarters for the civic engagement effort. You'll notice on the right-hand side of the form, kind of halfway down, there's a section about permanent absentee. The left-hand column is voter registration. You have to check off a bunch of boxes to make sure you're actually eligible to register and vote. The right-hand side is for permanent absentee. We recommend that everybody fill out the permanent absentee section because what that allows for you to do is to vote by mail. So you'll get a ballot in the mail, you can fill it out and mail it back in. You don't have to show up at your polling place on election day, and as Corey said earlier, that saves you the hassle of battling the long lines and the long waits on election day. Don't be intimidated by permanent absentee. You can change your address at any time. You don't actually have to be absent on election day to do that. Anybody that fills out this side of the form will get a mail-in ballot, and you can vote by mail. So it makes it a lot more convenient and easier, so we recommend that everybody do it. That's how I've voted in the past. And then, of course, be sure to sign and date the form in all the required spaces at the bottom. That thing on the very bottom, the witness signature, you don't need unless you cannot sign your own name, and in that case, you'd have to have a witness. But otherwise, you can leave that blank. One last question we get is the difference between residence address and mailing address. So the residence address is used by the Office of Elections to determine who ends up on your ballot. So like if you put down Manoa, an address in Manoa as your residence address, your ballot will have all the candidates for that district. If you put down Kaimaki, your ballot will have the candidates for that district. That address cannot be a P.O. box. It must actually be a physical location. Now, if you've moved around a lot or you don't have a place to live, we get this question from houseless folks a lot of times. You don't have to have an address. You can actually say this park or this intersection or this corner is the place where I'm living. It's only used to determine kind of geographically what district you're in and who ends up on the ballot. The mailing address can be a P.O. box, and that's just someplace where you're going to get mail from the Office of Elections, including your ballot if you decide to vote by mail. So that spiel I just gave you, which took probably 3.5 minutes, is actually the spiel that we give in classrooms. And so one of the handouts you have is the script for what happens and what you would say if you wanted to volunteer to go in and register people to vote as a group. So presentation script from that header on down is what I just said. And I went a little bit long because I went into a little bit more detail than you have to, but the script, if you just read this from beginning to end, it would take 2 minutes. Okay. And one thing you'd want to do if you're actually going to do this is, here's how to work procedurally. We're going to have a stack of these voter registration forms blank available here in Iliahi A and B for anybody to just pick up and take with them. Either fill it out on the spot, or if you want to go into a classroom, you take a stack with you, and you take one of the also pick up one of these manila envelopes, and I'll get to what this is used for in a minute. You would contact the professor either directly or have one of us do it for you. Like I said, we've already gotten a handful of professors who are interested. Make an introduction, just introduce yourself, confirm the date, time, and location, and get a head count of the number of students that are going to be there so you can be sure you have enough forms. If the professor is open to it, ask them to remind their students that they'll need their social security number to register. And then before you go and visit the class, just review this sheet with the script on the first page, front and back, and then also in your little packet of handouts is a bunch of FAQs that are beyond what I shared in the spiel. And they include things like, does registering to vote affect my residency status, which is a question we often get from students. Can I register if I'm from Guam, from American Samoa, or Micronesia? And the rules are a little bit different for different categories of people, so that's also in here. Do I need a photo ID to register to vote? The answer to that is no. But if you're voting for the first time, you'll need to mail in a copy of your ID with your ballot. But anyway, a bunch of questions that we normally get, so you'd want to kind of familiarize yourself with that before you go in. That's all pre-presentation. Day of the presentation, make sure you get your forms in your envelope, show up at the class. If I had a pen, I would write on the whiteboard what I've asked you to write here, which is just, KCC Civic Engagement Campaign. My email address for any questions is james.koshiba@gmail.com, and this room number for anybody that wants to drop off forms or pick up blank forms after the fact. I recommend that you give out the forms as people are coming in, or have them on people's seats at their desks already. That'll save time from passing it out as you're talking, and it'll get people ready to go at the beginning. We want to be respectful of professors' time and class time. We've said we'll try to keep it to under 10 minutes. And because this is a pilot run, we're going to see how long it actually takes, and we'll adjust as we go, but I think it's doable within 10 minutes. So you'd have all that stuff ready and out. People come in, and then you just start the presentation using the script. Different people are comfortable with different formats. I'm more comfortable speaking kind of from bullet points and kind of having gone over it and just hitting the high points. Other people are more comfortable reading it. Either way is fine. The important point is to get some of the key content across. So you'll see the script includes all the sort of persuasive talking points, and then the points I covered about the specifics of the voter registration form itself. And then, like we did, once you're done with the spiel, you can say, let me give you a few minutes to actually fill out the forms, and I'm happy to take questions at this time. Class will be quiet. People will be filling out forms, hopefully. Give people a few minutes to do that, maybe 3 minutes. And then when 3 minutes is up, and I would try to be mindful of the time to make sure that we're still under the 10 minutes overall. But then say, thanks so much for allowing me to be here in class with you. Out of respect for the professor's time, I want to end now and collect any forms that have been completed. So pass them all to the front. If you have blank forms, hand those in too. We'll reuse them. And if you started a form and you need more time to finish it, you can drop it off at Iliahi A and B, and that'll be on the board. Right? If there are any questions that come up that you can't answer, you can say, I don't know the answer to that, but I can get it for you, and I will get back to you through your professor. Write it down. When you're done, you can email it to me and copy the professor, and I'll make sure the answer gets back to them. Any questions so far on the process? No? So ideally, if you've been super persuasive, you'll have a stack of completed voter registration forms at the end of class. And then what we're going to ask you to do is put them in the manila envelope, seal it, print your name and the date across the seal. The reason why this is important is because there is sensitive information on these forms. We're going to keep track of when batches of forms are collected, who all the volunteers were that were part of collecting them, and we want to be sure that they're delivered to the county clerk, which takes the voter registration forms, within 5 working days of when they're actually collected. So every batch will be dated, have the name of the person who collected it, and then we'll also keep track of when it was actually delivered to the Office of Elections. So if anybody comes back and they're like, well, I never got my thing in the mail, are you sure mine was delivered? We'll have a record of, yep, we had it on this date, it was turned into the Office of Election at this time. You might want to contact them because sometimes they'll reject forms if something's left blank or there's an error that doesn't match up. But at least we can give people an answer if they have questions about their form or what happened to it. Make sense? Okay. That data handling process is on the last of your 3 handouts. It's a 1-pager that looks like this. And in case people have questions about how we handle the forms, it's down on the bottom half. On the top half are some fairly straightforward do's and don'ts for volunteers. There are things that I've already talked about, but one that is worth repeating is this is entirely nonpartisan, non-candidate, and so that means not only not pushing your views, but also being mindful of sort of where and when you're doing voter outreach. And this is not so much for this campus-based effort, but this goes for, like, you wouldn't want to be doing a voter registration drive right outside somebody's campaign office, as an example, or time to coincide with someone's big speech where you're registering, and it's clear you're registering because you support one candidate. That's the kind of thing that gets people into trouble. And that's where the line is between sort of electioneering and nonpartisan voter registration and outreach. One other thing that will go out, we'll ask you to distribute, and these will be clipped together. So every voter registration form will also have this little card attached to it. And this is a separate sign up. All it is I think you each have one of them, but it's just first name, last name, email, and zip code. And this is if people want to get information about candidates or info about volunteer opportunities related to civic engagement in the lead up to the election. And so you can explain that if people have questions. Common Cause and Kanu Hawaii are on there. You don't have to say a lot about the organizations. What I shared is enough. And actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, I should probably include that on kind of the Q&A form. I'll be sure to add that to the Q&A form. But this is if they want info about candidates, and especially for state and local races, like for state legislature and city council. I don't know about you guys, but it's really hard to find information on those candidates. A lot of times, all I know about them is how long they've been waving sign out on the corner, before election day. And if I recognize the name, sometimes that's all I have to go on. So this is a way to make sure that you actually have something more than that to go on heading into election day. Yeah. Any questions? Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. For you guys that were actually filling out the forms, was everything pretty straightforward on the form itself? Yeah? And let me ask for some honest feedback. Like if someone came into your class, or let's take today as an example, right? I say, you can register to vote. Do you have hesitations about it? And if you have hesitations about it, let's talk about where those hesitations come from, because that'll help me and help us sort of figure out how to communicate to people if they have hesitations about registering to vote, kind of what's holding people back.
I wasn't registered for a while because I didn't want jury duty.
Yeah. You know, Corey, you want to say something about that?
That's a common thing. My grandpa did not vote for most of my life because of that, but it actually gets pulled from driver's license and other lists too, so it's not the only reason, so it won't prevent you from getting jury duty, alas. Otherwise, yeah, maybe I do that too, but no, that's not the case.
There is something weird in the universe, though, of like after you register, it so happens that like
you get it.
You kind of get it.
Pure coincidence.
But it does. I actually called the elections office to ask about that too, and they said that's not where it gets pulled. I mean, it gets pulled from us, but it gets pulled from other sources.
I mean, the driver's license list and state ID list is so much bigger, so they're going to pull from that.
Yeah.
True.
Just there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Other questions or hesitations?
Well, speaking as a millennial, I know they don't see the point of voting, and also especially in Hawaii, where the voter turnout is the lowest compared to any other state. You know, so I don't have the answers, but I would love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, you know, so I guess two things on the. Let me take the second one first, on the Hawaii thing. So it is true that Hawaii has the lowest voter turnout of any state in the nation. And sometimes what we hear from people is that not only do votes not really count, but it especially doesn't count in Hawaii. And if you're thinking of the presidential, you know, or the big national races, because we're counted last, we vote last, we're counted last, the race is already decided. I think one response to that is that, you know, that isn't the only race that matters. 2 election cycles ago, the guy who became the chair of the city council, which makes all the decisions about some of the biggest projects that affect all of our lives, from rail to housing and homelessness to stuff that we see and touch every day, he won his race by less than 50 votes. You know? So that was a situation where every vote counted and made a huge difference in the outcome of things that actually affect our day-to-day lives. So in that sense, the votes do count. And I guess the second thing, going back to the larger point of, well, we don't really see the point of it, you know, I'd love to hear more, because that's something I've felt in my life. That's something a lot of people feel in their lives. Like, what's the point, you know? System's rigged anyway, or, you know, they don't listen to voters in the end. You know, if you got the inside track and connections and resources, that's what's going to matter. Like I said, I've felt like that many times in my adult life, and my only answer to that is that there's only one antidote to that, and that is actually people speaking up and turning up and registering and turning out. And that, you know, as I said at the beginning, that part of the reason why that is the case is that not enough of us are showing up, and it's left a vacuum that other forces have stepped into. And the fewer people show up, the louder money talks and the louder connections talk.
Well, as a millennial yourself, do you guys have any points to that? Because I'm sure you guys would get questions to that too. I mean, we get it all the time, but, you know, what would you say to your peers?
And I guess I would say to them that, you know, it's very important for them to be aware of what's happening at the lowest level of government. It's just a lot of people complain about, like, everything that's happening to them in life, but they're not actually, I guess, making the choices, putting people in positions that speak for them. They're kind of just letting life happen to them, letting politics happen to them. So I think right now it's more important than anything to just encourage people to vote.
And as an individual, your vote doesn't, like, can't swing an election, but as a voting bloc, as you were talking about, James, like, millennials are the most tolerant generation, and we have views like student debt. That's something that we overwhelmingly agree on, but then we don't vote. So, which is why the people who vote the most are rich white old men. So, and the government works for them, to be honest. So I feel that if we, think of ourselves as a collective voice rather than a lone voice.
Those are both great talking points, and if you decide to do this, I'd encourage you to share those points with people. I mean, I love don't let life happen to you. Make choices and be proactive about it. Anything that anybody lists as a challenge in their own personal life has some connection to government, right? Even if it's something happening within your family, if it's your commute to work, if it's some condition within your workplace or in school, student debt, as you mentioned, government has an effect on every one of those things, right? So I like that. Don't let life happen to you. Be proactive about it. And then I think the voting as a block is another powerful one. That there are issues that matter to millennials, and there's tremendous power in that, tremendous political power in the potential of that generation. But to realize that potential is going to take people actually turning on and voting and thinking as a block. Other either hesitations or good sort of persuasive talking points that you think might be useful for folks?
Just a comment. When I volunteered for the Hillary Clinton campaign, I don't want to make this partisan, but she lost every precinct by only 2 votes. That shows like the extreme closeness of the race and how a single vote actually can make a difference.
I think that, like you were saying too, even if you're like, oh, we're in Hawaii, like, we're decided last, it's already decided, whatever. I do think that, in a sense, like, the president's almost like a puppet. But like you're saying, we can control all the other people. We do have checks and balances and stuff like that. So if we want to change something, we can always start there. And then when we do get more people registered to vote and everything, the next presidential election, it could end up making a difference.
Yep.
I think
key point.
one thing, I guess, I don't know how knowledgeable everyone is on like the current political people of Hawaii, but just knowing what they're actually doing, just to counter the debate of whether Hawaii matters or not. Senator Corona and Senator Schatz, like, their voices are really being heard over in DC. Senator Corona, she's been like a very huge advocate for health-related things pertaining to healthcare within the U.S. So it's good, I guess, for us to be knowledgeable on those things, so we can say like, hey, Hawaii does matter. Look what they're doing. Look what Tulsi Gabbard's doing for veterans. Like, look at the impact that they're making, even though we're literally in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
So I think it's just important to let them see that, or at least explain it to them.
Yeah, that's great. You guys mind if I incorporate some of these talking points into the training materials? I'm just thinking, we're doing another one of these trainings tomorrow, and as I said, we're going to be doing it at UH Manoa campus too. And these are the points that kind of speak to the audience because they're coming from you guys. And so I think they deserve a place in kind of the training materials. If you know that you want to do this with us and try it out, here's how it's going to go from here on out. So I'm going to do a first round, and anybody that's available in a classroom, kind of a classroom presentation, and have whoever's available sort of tag along and sort of watch how it works. And then from thereafter, if you feel like you're ready to go do it, we'll just turn you loose. We'll have the supplies all here to do it. If you already know today that you want to do it, then let me know before you leave. Grab a Common Cause t-shirt on your way out You can wear it to your presentation or not, but it's for you to take and keep. And all of our volunteers will be sure of two things. One is you get some swag. So there's also Kanu Hawaii t-shirts, which I could not pick up in time to bring today, but t-shirts, food every time we get together. And the third thing is we'll gather up any volunteers periodically to debrief, like what's working, what's not working, what are we learning from this, and not just about voter registration, but what are we learning sort of leadership skills wise about how to be persuasive, what people are turned off to, what are we learning about ourselves through this process. Because having to get up in front of a group, again, whether it's 5 people or 50 people, and try to persuade them to do something, that's sort of a cornerstone leadership experience. And we'll learn a lot about ourselves and each other and that process just by doing that. So want to be sure we have time to debrief. But food, swag, and some learning guaranteed. I got to tell you, it was really good fun. By the end, we had a crew of about 40 volunteers, half of them from university campuses. And the campus piece was one component of it, and we did not only classroom presentations, we ended up tabling at events, and we'd even like go into dining halls, and as people were sitting there eating, we'd make an announcement and pass out voter registration forms. And I think that's how we got to 1,000 pretty quickly. But we took it a step further, and some of those students also went with us kind of into the community-based outreach piece. So we ended up going door to door in some of the lowest turnout precincts on Oahu. So we went in Nanakuli and Waianae. We went door to door, registered people to vote, gave them voter information. And then one last piece of it, which we probably won't replicate this time, but something for kind of future reference is, one thing that was powerful was we asked people as we met them, whether it was on campus, in a classroom, or door to door, like, oh, what's one question you would want to ask your local candidates this year? We took all those questions and we sort of compiled them kind of like word cloud style, and we identified the top issues, and that became the basis for a candidate questionnaire that sort of came from people directly to the candidates, and then we asked them to answer, and those are the answers we were able to get back to people before election time. But engaging people in this way, whether it's a classroom or at the door, is like it's a pretty awesome way to get your finger on the pulse of your community and what matters to people. I was pretty shocked. I mean, almost everybody I talked to, no matter what neighborhood they were from, whether they even had a house or not, was informed about certain issues and had an opinion about certain issues. There were certain issues that mattered a lot to them. And so that tells me that, despite the fact that we have low voter turnout, people care, and they're following, they're tracking what's going on. It's just if we can get them over that hump to register and vote, that's when those voices will really count. So I think that's it. Thanks for being here.